and how to better receive the messages that are always coming from our body, and some tips and tricks and explorations of how we might be able to bring ourselves back into alignment if there's any deviations that we can identify. I'm Sienna Songbird, liver flusher, detox enthusiast, and I'm joined here today by my dear fellow health warrior, Tayel.
Hi.
And we would love to share this exploration with you. So please join us.
Yeah, so we were having a conversation about all the different ways that we track how we're feeling in our body and some of the ways that we've learned over time to adjust those things. Um, Inviting you right now, if you are excited to join in with us and digest a little bit of this for yourself, close your eyes right now and just notice your body. Maybe that includes your mind, your emotions. How are you feeling? How are you feeling right now? Do you feel heavy? Do you feel light? Do you feel jittery, maybe, or sluggish? What are some of the signs that help you know how you're feeling? Maybe you might notice some mornings you wake up and you feel a little bit clogged. Maybe you feel a little bit phlegmy, or, maybe that there are mornings where you wake up and you feel like really empty and hungry inside, for example. Just inviting you to check in now and notice how you're feeling. How do you know that's how you're feeling? Do you feel it in your limbs? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your belly? And then think back to the last few days, maybe the last week or two. If you take a scan over the bigger picture of your state of being, what are some of the other ways you felt? Is there a certain way that you tend to feel frequently? Is there a certain way you tend to feel maybe at certain times of the day? Maybe you could think about some of the last few times you've eaten. How did you feel before you ate? And how did you feel after you ate? How did you feel maybe 2 or 3 hours after that? How did you feel when you woke up in the morning? And how did you feel when you were getting ready for bed at night? And what were some of the signs that you were tracking and that you tend to track that help you know when you need to eat, when you need to rest, when you're ready to go to bed? Beyond just, of course, your alarms and notifications. What are those things that you notice that help you stay in touch with your body? I'm wondering, Sienna, how is that for you? Like, what's your experience with that?
Mm. Well, I was thinking particularly, I would have symptoms I experience fullness or congestion kind of in my head, which like a lot of, there's a symptom that we talk about called brain fog, but it's like definitely I can feel an experience of like fog kind of like building up. And then sometimes I might apply a remedy that like shifts that and clears it. And all of a sudden I can feel like, whoa, I can see better and there's more space in my head. So it's like, yeah, something about in that phlegm area. Or for me, like tension will also build, you know, in at certain times or in certain ways or in certain correlations to the rhythm of the days or things like that. And I was also thinking like, what about like when do you know to apply movement or exercise?
Oh yeah,
How
that's
do
a
you
really
get
good one.
feedback with like, yeah, like, oh, I'm due for a walk or, or like how that impacts. So like that's some of the things that I track. And also like my pain levels, just in
Mhm,
general,
mhm.
pain levels and inflammation. And also there's a variety of things that I would apply to shift or help that. But yeah, I think this is such a great and important conversation, because if we know like simple tools, well, right, you have to be like hearing the messages, receiving them and interpreting them at least somewhat correctly. And then if you have some like simple tools that like this thing creates this effect, you know? So
Yeah, totally.
it's a way for us to be really more empowered about, taking our health into our own hands, and like also honing in on that intuition so that we can like walk.
What's interesting for me, something that's coming up for me as we talk is how actually some of what I might consider my chronic illness symptoms are actually part of what help keep me in touch with my state of being, which is really interesting. I never quite thought about it that way, because I myself, like maybe like a lot of you out there are certain, even though I've been on this journey for a long time and I feel like I'm in a pretty good place with my health, I have like my sort of personal recurring chronic illness symptoms that are something that I'm sort of always dancing with and tracking and keeping in check. And it's partially through noticing as those rise and fall how I'm doing. And in a way, it's partially because of my awareness or even fear of how bad things can be if they get really out of control, that motivate me to want to keep things manageable. And I'm actually noticing now that my chronic illness symptoms have been kind of a teacher for me in helping bring me into more awareness of, in general, how my body actually works, and like what does what and what creates what effect. Like I know for myself, I have moved out of really intense food sensitivities into a little more ability to eat a variety of things. And yet I also know that, I can feel the ebb and flow of how things change for myself. So I might notice, for example, that if on one hand, if I lean too hard into eating a lot of salads, raw foods, that I might start to actually feel too light or too unstable. Like I might notice like, okay, I think I need a little more grounding. Like this might be a good time to have some, like butter or.
And you used to also get really cold.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Cold is like a big symptom for me of noticing, or sometimes I'll feel a little more edgy or anxious or unsettled, cold. Those are some things that come up for me if I'm actually eating too light or eating a lot of fruits and salads. On the other hand, and I'm sure probably this is more familiar for a lot of us, like I'm grateful that I'm at a place with my health where there's a lot of things I can eat. And, I might say like go out to dinner with my parents, or, maybe like my friend bakes a really amazing loaf of bread and I really want to eat like 5 slices of toast a day or something. I might notice, or maybe I have like a really late meal one night. I can start to show those signs like, okay, I've probably been I'm starting to feel some signs, which for me look like I might start to have a little bit of joint pain. I might start to feel a little sluggish. I might notice, especially if I have a large late meal in the evening, that when I wake up the next morning, I'm like, I feel a little like clogged, and so, and I know that I can handle that like a few days running. But if I am like eating heavy meals or eating late or like, having too much cheese or something for a few days in a row, the symptoms are going to start to build. And that's when I can start to tip into that place of like, okay, I'm starting to feel some of my chronic symptoms creeping
Mhm.
in. Today's a good day. I'm going to really make sure that I eat like 2 or 3 apples today. Or I'm going to make sure that if I'm feeling a little sluggish, I know I ate late last night. I'm going to just sharpen up a bit with my morning, make sure that I am choosing when to eat really consciously, maybe fasting, waiting an hour or two before I start eating to give my body more time to clear out. So
Mhm.
those are some of the ways that looks for me. How is that? How have you
Yeah.
noticed that?
Well, I just wanted to sort of comment on that, that it sounds like almost like it could be seen that the chronic illness, like the symptoms are kind of like canaries in the coal mine, that they're
Yeah.
kind of like alerting us to the coming imbalances, so it's a really beautiful feedback loop. And I too have been in kind of with a lot of changing life circumstances, like and a certain confidence with my health, after so much work. That I too have been like sort of relaxing the reins around the food and like trying, experimenting with a pretty different diet than I had been on strictly for a while. And also noticing, and like for me, I was just thinking like I was thinking of like the the viral kind of experiences too that might flare up, um like the like those kind of irritations or sores or these kinds of things, like so
Yeah.
you and I have different pictures, in terms of like how our symptoms present, but I was kind of thinking of like on your side those kind of like tracers and that like
Yeah, like I'll get mouth sores is one of my things. Or I also, I've become attuned over time to noticing like something's a little off with like my yeast biome. It's pretty subtle. It's not like I necessarily have like a full-blown yeast infection, but there's certain signs like I might notice I'm feeling a little itchy, or I might notice like, oh, it feels like my tongue has a really thick coating when I
mm,
wake up in the morning. It's the little things that they're kind of like illness symptoms. Um, but there's not like a full-blown illness. Maybe some other people have things like, oh, allergies are acting up, or they're noticing that.
well, yeah, and I would say like all these things, part of the reason that we're able to see when they come and when they go is because of having space from them to a certain degree, right? Like
Mhm.
if the symptom is constant and you've basically built up to like this is how it always is, then it's pretty hard to like catch and track fluctuation. So you
Totally.
almost need like a certain amount of space, because if someone has, you know, a bloom on their tongue and that's just how it is for them all the time. Or for me, inflammation in my head is something that it's kind of like it does this, but it doesn't really ever like I'm still working on that one
Yeah.
to get it to like fully bottom out. So I can't use that one as well for tracking. But for me, like just on that yeast and itch, I was gonna say like mine is more the itchies. So I
Mhm.
call them the itchies because I've had a long and intimate relationship with extreme amounts of welts that appear and scalps that itches and flakes and crazy. I mean, yeah, like full blown urticaria for years. But like that has now become one of the symptoms that I can use as a benchmark, only because I finally found a way, through the GAPS diet mostly over the last year, that I dropped that symptom entirely to zero. So like before it was just confusing. It was just like always, it was kind of all the time there. And so it was much harder to track. But when you have that slate that like you have once you get a baseline somewhere, then I like, and lately I've been noticing that I'm starting to have these like spikes in itchiness, and it starts in this kind of subtle way. And I'm like, whoa, all of a sudden I'm noticing that I'm scratching my head, and I have been for the last 10 minutes. And and for me, it kind of rises in like a flush of itchiness. But as Tayel was saying too, it'll be like, ooh, I got away with that. I got away with eating that, tiny piece of sugar like a day ago. But then if I continue to have anything that's like in the family that feeds that particular kind of flare, it's cumulative. And so
Totally.
all of a sudden I'll be like, ooh, this is going in a bad direction. I'm starting to have actual welts and I'm
Yeah.
starting to have these symptoms that I haven't had for a long time. And
Yeah, I really like a point that you just brought up, and I'm really grateful to you for reminding me, which is that everyone's at a really different place with their health. And we're blessed to be able to have this conversation many years into the journey and getting to a place where we're tracking our health more subtly. But that doesn't mean that if we're at a different place with our health, we can't still start tracking. And I think that's part of what's motivating this conversation today is noticing how can I start to tune in with fluctuations in my body, no matter where I'm at. So like there was a time for me where joint pain was kind of like your head, your head congestion or your jaw pain. It's like it's always happening. It's not going away. It's always happening to some degree. However, even within that, we can notice a little bit of an ebb and a flow. Like, okay, I'm having joint pain every day, but I noticed that on this day, my joints are so swollen, like so bad that they're actually swollen, like visibly swollen. Or on this day, like my hand hurts to the point that I'm having trouble fully using my range of motion, and another day it's just a little bit achy.
yeah, and likewise with the jaw tension thing, I can have the experience that all of a sudden it gets way worse, and it just clenching down and getting more tight. And that, for me in particular, one of the ones I've actually tracked successfully is like dehydration. If something is causing extreme dehydration for me, then it's like everything it's like drying and clenching further.
Yeah.
So even though it's kind of there constantly, it is possible to track these ebbs and flows of it getting worse or not. And like would you say that one of the ways that makes that possible? Because I will say that it's like I've been taught that it's not like you can just say, oh, 10, 20 minutes, 2 hours after I ate, that's the evidence for this particular effect. It can be different things can take like all different lengths of time to like roll out their implications. And so one thing that makes this process a little bit easier is if there's some consistency to like what you're consuming or what the inputs are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, really, it's all related to a kind of increasing our observational ability. It starting to notice, no matter where we're at, starting to notice fluctuations. And then as we tune into those fluctuations, we start to gain the ability to track for longer periods of time, track subtler symptoms. And yeah, it is easier to notice if we have some kind of consistency in our routine. But that being said, I think everyone has something like that. Everyone has something. So really inviting all of you out there to notice wherever you're at in your process, where are some of the ways that you can track and notice fluctuations? And I mean, this is like a super crude example, but probably most of us have been there. It could be something as simple as just noticing if you're in a reality where alcohol is a part of your reality. Something as simple as, how did I feel after I had several drinks compared to like how do I feel on a morning when I didn't drink any, a morning after not drinking any alcohol. It can be sometimes like, again, it's sort of like the chronic illness symptoms. Sometimes the really blunt, crude instruments do give us some feedback, or like, how did I feel after I ate pizza? Like, pizza and beer. Like, do I feel different the morning after, as opposed to like, a more moderate evening?
Yeah. And actually kind of one that we might not think about is a symptom can actually be cravings for food. So if I go down a certain direction of food, if I introduce something into my diet, I may actually find myself craving in a certain direction. And that itself can be really good information.
So could you help me understand?
Yeah. So for me, it's, and I know there's people out there who have extreme sensitivity. So this can be with carbs, but often sugar, or even like certain kinds of meat. Like you can really get on a train where your body starts like craving a certain thing, or MSG or something like that. But I would say for me, sugar. So say I'm like, I've been off of white sugar. It was a drug for me. I had to get off of it very clearly. But like for instance, somebody's sharing some kombucha with me, which is not something I regularly drink. Supposedly the sugar has mostly been transformed. But for me, if I introduce that level of sugar, I will find that for multiple days afterwards, like maybe the next day, I'm like, all of a sudden I would like to eat more grapes today. And then the next day I'm like, I think if I listen to my intuition, I'm gonna have some dried fruit. I'm gonna have some figs. I'm gonna have some prunes. Which might not be in my regular thing. And it's this interesting cascade that I actually didn't realize got started back there with the trace kombucha. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I think I'm gonna buy some cookie dough, like like seriously, it'll go like, it just takes off. Wow. And I wasn't even aware that I had consumed, I could have easily missed that I consumed sugar and started a cascade.
Wow.
That subtly brought me there.
That's an amazing example. And again, like you can easily see how for most of us, we could just blow right past that and not even notice. But as we start to pay attention and invite ourselves to pay attention, tracking ourselves, our ability to notice these things increases. I know for me, like my version of that, it's a little bit different, but similar, is I notice a relationship, something that I am in, you could say some kind of like recovery from, is drinking coffee, drinking, a lot of caffeine. And I noticed for myself a relationship between, sometimes I would drink coffee and maybe for a little while I'd feel good, but then at a certain point I'd actually feel too jittery. I'd feel kind of ungrounded. And then I would notice like, oh, I need to eat something, like I need to eat something kind of, or maybe my blood sugar would get kind of off kilter from the coffee. And so then I would feel like, oh, I need to eat something heavy to kind of ground myself. So, I might just eat something like either carbs or fat or a combination of them, just to ground out my caffeine. But then it can kind of create a cycle where if I overdo it a little bit on the heavy food, then I'm like, oh, I feel really sluggish. I think I need another stimulant, like another cup of coffee, or maybe I eat some chocolate or something like that. And that I could see for myself, there was a cycle, or maybe I'd have a really like a heavy meal one night, be like, oh, I went out to dinner with my family and like ate a bunch of like, heavy food, maybe overate a little bit. And then the next morning I'd be like, oh, I feel really heavy. Like I really need to have coffee this morning. So noticing for myself a cycle, a relationship between the kind of like upper of the caffeine and then the downer of the heavy food and carbs, and how that could create a loop that kind of keeps me locked in that.
And isn't like kind of the most classic example of that also like coffee and alcohol? Also
Yes.
cigarettes and alcohol.
Yeah, so many people. I mean, and no shame at all. Like again, all of seeing everything is the invitation here is to start to pay more attention. And as soon as we're paying more attention, we're going to get more information. And as we get more information, we get to be guided by what feels good for us. So there isn't one right way. We can literally start wherever we're at, whatever food or substances or behaviors that we're engaging with as a doorway to help us start tracking. And yeah, a lot of people, I mean, I see it with so many people that I know. It's like coffee gets them rolling in the morning and maybe throughout the day. And then there's a certain point where it's like, okay, I got to put on the brakes now. Like basically I'm kind of wired, agitated, a little bit stressy from my day and probably from to some degree the amount of caffeine I'm consuming. And so it's like, then I put on the brakes with alcohol and basically like bring my day to a close. Basically, I'm like leaning on the alcohol to help me actually slow down and chill out. Then I kind of knock myself out with alcohol and then unsurprisingly wake up the next morning feeling groggy and back on the coffee. So whatever it is, again, it's just like, it's no judgment about where we're at. It's the invitation to notice.
Yeah.
So we would love to hear from you. What is your experience? What are those signs and symptoms that you notice in your health? And what are some of the tools you use to modulate? Whether that's some of the old fashioned ones we've been talking about here, or whether for you it might look like I eat more fruit, or I make sure I drink lemon water in the morning, or, however that looks for you. We would love to hear about it. And we would love to hear your comments in the comment section below.
Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with us today, and it's been great, and we'll see you soon. And wishing you all a beautiful journey of tuning in deeper to ourselves to receive the wisdom and messages and communication that is always happening within our system. This beautiful ecosystem with this amazing feedback loop. And I know that we can find our way to good listening and thus empowered action that can help us to feel better and better and better and reclaim our true birthright of true vitality.
We're all in this together. So let's share our wisdom and help each other grow. Thank you.